I knew something was wrong as soon as I pulled into the gas station. It was late, around 11 in the evening, and the usually crowded place was eerily quiet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh light on the empty rows. I was driving back from a business trip through rural Pennsylvania. The plan was to refuel, grab a bite to eat, and continue the last few hours to get home. As I was walking to the cash register, I noticed a man by the slushy machine. He was tall, with an untidy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dirty, like someone who has lived on the street for a long time. Our eyes met for a moment, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something predatory in his gaze. Ignoring the anxiety that was gnawing at me, I quickly grabbed a bottle of water and headed to the counter. The cashier, a young girl with bright red hair, smiled nervously as she punched through my merchandise. I could feel the man looking at me all this time with a hard, unpleasant look. "Long night, huh?" The cashier tried to start a conversation. "Yeah, just trying to get home," I replied, glancing over my shoulder. The man didn't move, continuing to stare at me with the same disturbing intensity. "Be careful," she said more quietly. "Strange things have been happening here lately. People disappearing." I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Thanks for the warning." I paid for the water and left the store, feeling the burning gaze of the man on me. It was completely dark outside. The only light source was a neon gas station sign. I quickly filled the tank, glancing at the empty parking lot. The man was still inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got into the car, I noticed something on the windshield. A small white piece of paper fluttering under the janitor. My heart was pounding as I reached out and grabbed it, unwrapping it with trembling hands. "You're next!" It was written in uneven, messy handwriting. I looked at the gas station again, feeling my blood run cold. The man disappeared. I sat in the car, clutching that unfortunate piece of paper, feeling the panic creep in slowly. "You are next." The words throbbed in my head, making me look around for any sign of danger. The night was oppressively dark, and it seemed that any movement of the shadow threatened death. Turning the ignition off, I quickly started the car, my fingers trembling on the ignition key. The engine finally roared and I hit the gas pedal, pulling out of the parking lot. The road was empty, only the rare lights of trucks flickered in the distance. I drove fast, wanting to leave the gas station as far behind as possible. But restlessness did not leave me. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up and my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. In the rearview mirror, I saw headlights appearing on the horizon. Whose could it be? Is that man following me? I forced myself to calm down and focus on the road, but those headlights were chasing me, getting closer by the minute. Unable to stand the tension, I decided to turn off the main road onto a small path, hoping that this would confuse the pursuer. The road became narrow and winding, cutting through a dense forest. There were no signs of civilization around, only darkness and fear. The headlights disappeared behind me, but I was not relieved. On the contrary, the tension only grew. My car bounced on bumps, the light of the headlights pulled out the outlines of trees from the darkness. Suddenly, something big and dark jumped out in front of me onto the road. I screamed and hit the brakes hard, feeling the car skid. She stopped with a jerk and I was breathing heavily, trying to figure out what exactly had happened. In front of the car lay the torn carcass of a deer, its eyes staring lifelessly into the night. I looked at this sight in horror, realizing that now I was all alone in this cursed forest. Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm down and figure out what to do next. Suddenly, I heard a soft rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart was beating wildly again. I couldn't wait and decided to go around the car to get to the trunk and take out the flashlight. As soon as I opened the trunk, I heard a soft but clear sound. Footsteps approaching. My imagination painted horrible pictures. That man from the gas station following me, an ominous smile on his face. I felt panic rising in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and turned, lighting the way ahead. Nothing. Only shadows of trees and silence. "Who is there?" I exclaimed, hoping that it was just my fear playing a bad joke on me. But in response, only deaf silence. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that it felt like it was going to explode. The flashlight shook in my hand, creating shadows that were even more frightening. I took a few steps back, holding the light in front of me, when suddenly I heard the same sound again, rustling in the bushes, closer this time. "Get out, whoever you are!" I shouted, but my confidence was melting. The sense of danger became more and more palpable. I lighted the bushes again, and suddenly a huge black shadow jumped out of them. Before I could understand what had happened, I fell to the ground, the flashlight flew out of my hands, and everything plunged into darkness. I felt a sharp pain in my arm when something heavy came down on me. In a panic, I tried to break free, but the more I struggled, the worse the pain became. "Let me go!" I shouted, kicking in the darkness, but there was no answer. Suddenly, what was holding me was gone, and I was left lying on the ground, breathing heavily. For a few seconds, the panic receded and I was able to concentrate. Fumbling for a flashlight, I quickly picked it up and shone it around. No one was visible. Maybe it was just a deer or some other animal, I thought, trying to calm myself down. But something inside me told me that this was not the case. Something evil and dark was nearby, hiding in the shadows. Getting to my feet, I realized I couldn't stay here much longer. I rushed back to the car, slumped into the driver's seat, and started the engine. My hands were still shaking, but I was able to get onto the road and continue driving. The forest seemed endless. Darkness enveloped me from all sides. After a few miles, I finally saw a faint light ahead. It was a small hut, one of those that stand along the road and seem empty, but the windows were lit, and I felt hope. I have to find help, at least someone who can explain what's going on. Stopping the car, I quickly ran out and headed for the door. Knocked several times, but no one answered. The light inside flickered, creating an eerie atmosphere. I knocked again, and suddenly the door opened. A middle-aged man with a tired face and empty eyes stood at the door. His clothes were tattered and his hands were shaking. He looked at me, and I felt a chill run down my skin. "What do you want?" he asked in a dull voice. "I need help," I replied. "Someone seems to be chasing me. I'm very scared." The man looked at me in silence, then took a step back and gestured to enter. I hesitated, but I had no choice. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me with a soft creak. It was dark and damp in the hut. Old photographs hung on the walls, faded and dusty. The man walked over to the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. I sat down across from him, keeping my eyes on his tortured face. "What happened to you?" he finally asked, slightly leaning forward. I told him everything. About the gas station, the man, the note, the chase, and the spooky forest. He listened in silence without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed and looked at me with his empty eyes. "You're not the first," he finally said. "This man has been terrorizing these places for a long time. He's not just a killer. He's truly evil." I felt a chill run over my skin. "What do you mean?" "He plays with people like a cat with a mouse, intimidates, chases, and then strikes. No one knows who he really is, but everyone knows that if he chooses you, you cannot escape him." My heart sank. "What should I do?" The man shook his head. "I don't know. Survive." Suddenly, I heard a loud knock on the door. We both shuddered, and the man turned white. "He's here," he whispered, and I realized we were in a trap. The knocking repeated, louder this time. I rose to my feet, looking around for an exit. "Where's the back door?" I asked, but the man did not answer. He sat motionless, as if frozen with terror. The knock turned into a hum, and I realized that time was running out. I ran to the back door, hoping to find a way out. When I opened them, they were locked. Panicking again, I looked for any other way out. Suddenly, the door in the kitchen exploded, and the same man from the gas station burst into the opening. His eyes burned with madness, and he held a long knife in his hand. I screamed and ran back into the living room, hoping to find something to defend myself with. But the man was faster. He lunged at me, and I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as the knife went through tissue and skin. I pushed him away, trying to break free, but he was stronger. His smile was scarier than any nightmare, and I knew this could be the end. Then the man sitting at the table suddenly came to life. He grabbed a chair and hit the maniac on the head, forcing him to let me go. "Run!" he shouted, and I, without thinking, rushed to the front door. Running outside, I heard a struggle going on inside. Without stopping, I ran to the car, praying that the keys were still there. After starting the engine, I sped off, leaving the hut behind. The feeling of danger did not leave me, but I was alive. I sped along the narrow road, not knowing where this path led, but just to get away from that hut and the maniac who was chasing me. Thoughts in his head were confused. Every sound seemed threatening. My heart was pounding so hard I felt like I was going to pass out. The darkness around was as thick as tar. The car's headlights broke out of the darkness just a few meters from the road ahead. I tried to concentrate, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those crazy eyes and the knife cutting through my shoulder. Pain throbbed in my arm, a reminder of the danger that still haunted me. Suddenly, the road ended, and I found myself in a small clearing. The car fell silent, and I realized that there was no further way. I got out of the car, looking around for some shelter or way to safety, but there was only death, darkness, and silence around. At that moment, I heard the sound of an engine. Somewhere nearby, someone was approaching. I couldn't stay here waiting for the maniac to find me. My heart pounded in my chest again, and I ran into the forest, hoping to find shelter among the trees. The forest was thick and dark. Every step was taken with difficulty. Branches scratched the face, and tree roots tangled underfoot. I ran without looking back, just to get away from the sound of the engine, which was inexorably approaching. My breathing became more and more difficult, and there was almost no strength left. Suddenly, I tripped and fell to the ground. Pain in my shoulder spread throughout my body, and I felt tears of helplessness rolling down my cheeks. I was lying in the dark, surrounded by the forest, and I felt completely alone and defenseless. I can't give up now, I thought, trying to gather my last strength. When I got to my feet, I realized that the sound of the engine had disappeared. Maybe I was able to escape? But this did not give me any comfort. The forest was big, and I had no idea where I was. My cell phone was in the car, and I couldn't call for help. I decided to go on, looking for any way to escape. Every step felt difficult, but I couldn't stop. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of an owl, and it gave me some strength. Nature lived its life, despite the horrors that were happening around. Walking through the forest, I thought about everything that had happened. Who was that man at the gas station? Why was he chasing me? There were no answers, only a sense of constant danger. Every step in the darkness seemed like a step into the unknown. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me. These were steps. Someone was following me. My heart jumped in my chest again, and I ran, trying to increase the distance between myself and my pursuer. The footsteps grew louder, and I felt fear paralyze my movements. Finally, I saw a faint light ahead. It was some kind of house, maybe another shelter. With the last of my strength, I rushed to him, hoping to find salvation. The footsteps behind me were getting closer and closer, and I felt that there was almost no time left. The door of the house was open, and I flew in, quickly closing it behind me. It was dark inside, but I heard a small voice. "Who's here?" asked the woman. "Help me, please," I answered, breathing heavily. "I'm being chased by a maniac." A woman came out of the darkness. She was elderly with kind but troubled eyes. "Quiet," she said. "He can hear us. We have to find a way to escape." I looked at her hopefully. "Do you know the way out?" "There is an old cellar," she answered. "We can hide there. Follow me." I followed her down to the basement, feeling the fear gradually give way to hope. She opened the door and we went downstairs. The basement was damp and dark, but it was better than staying on the surface. "Well, be safe here," said the woman, closing the door behind us. "Just quiet. We can let him know we're here." We sat in the dark, and I could feel the tension slowly recede, but my heart was still beating fast and I couldn't calm down. Are we really safe? Can we survive this night? Time dragged on for an unbearably long time. In the darkness of the basement, it was difficult to breathe. The air seemed thick and suffocating. A woman sat nearby, silently listening to every sound from above. We didn't know if the maniac had found us or if he was still looking. Suddenly, I heard a soft creak on the floor above us. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but rather the slow movement of something heavy. I felt the tension creeping up on me again. Could it be him? The woman squeezed my hand, trying to calm me down. Her eyes were full of fear, but also determination. "We have to be quiet," she whispered. "If he hears us, we're doomed." The sounds from above became louder. Steps. He was definitely here. I felt panic wash over me and tried to focus on my breathing so I wouldn't give myself away. Every sound seemed louder in the darkness. Suddenly, the basement door began to slowly open. The light from the upper floor penetrated the darkness and I saw a silhouette. It was him. His figure seemed even more terrifying in this weak light. I felt the terror paralyze me. We were trapped. The maniac descended the stairs slowly, his eyes shining with an ominous fire. He knew we were here and nothing could save us. The woman suddenly stood up and rushed at him, trying to stop him. "Run!" she shouted, and I realized that this was my only chance. I ran for the door, past the maniac and the woman fighting on the stairs. My heart was beating wildly, but I couldn't stop. I ran outside for a breath of fresh air and rushed back into the forest. I ran through the forest, feeling the branches scratch my face and hands. Every sound seemed menacing, every shadow a threat. The maniac was somewhere nearby and I could not afford to stop. Finally, I reached a small river. The water was cold, but it was better than staying in the woods. I jumped into the water and began to swim to the other side, hoping it would help blur the tracks. On the other bank, I stopped, breathing hard. The river could give me some time, but I knew it wouldn't last long. The maniac won't stop until he finds me. I saw a small cave and decided to hide there. It was dark and damp inside, but it was better than being out in the open. I crawled deeper, trying to become invisible in the darkness. Time stopped again. Every second seemed like an eternity. I tried to listen to the sounds outside, but I heard nothing but my heavy breathing and the beating of my heart. Could it be that I was finally able to escape? Suddenly, I heard a loud noise near the cave entrance. It was him. The maniac stood at the entrance, his eyes shining in the darkness. He found me. I knew there was nowhere else to run. Feeling panic creep over me, I raised the stone, ready to defend myself to the last. The maniac slowly came closer. His smile was scarier than any nightmare. "Did you think you could escape?" he whispered. "But you won't run away from me." I threw myself at him with a rock, but he easily pushed me away and I fell to the ground. Pain shot through my whole body, but I tried to get up. The maniac grabbed me by the hair and lifted me up, forcing me to look into his crazy eyes. "This is the end," he said, raising the knife. I could feel the cold metal of the knife touching my throat. My whole body was filled with terror. My heart was pounding wildly, but I mustered all my willpower not to panic. "You need to act while there is still a chance." Suddenly, voices echoed in the cave. Someone was approaching. The maniac looked around, and at that moment, I took the opportunity. Gathering the last of my strength, I kicked him in the stomach, forcing him to retreat. He groaned in pain and released me for a moment. I took advantage of this moment by grabbing a stone that was lying nearby and hit him on the head. He staggered, and I knew this was my only chance. I rushed to the exit of the cave, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. When I ran out into the light, I saw several people approaching the cave with flashlights. They were local residents who apparently heard the noise and came to help. I rushed towards them, feeling some of the tension drain from me. "Hez there!" I shouted, pointing to the cave. "Maniac! He tried to kill me!" People rushed to the cave, armed with sticks and flashlights. I stood aside, trying to regain my senses. My head was buzzing, my body was still shaking from adrenaline, but I knew it wasn't the end. The maniac was too dangerous to be caught just like that. People entered the cave, and I heard the sounds of a struggle. Loud screams and the noise of a fight echoed off the walls. I could not stand by, knowing that they were risking their lives. Gathering my strength, I returned to the cave and ran inside. The maniac was surrounded, but still fighting like a wild beast. His face was covered in blood, but he didn't give up. I saw one of the men fall with a knife. Others tried to stop the maniac, but he was relentless. I picked up a stick lying on the ground and threw myself at him with all my might. Hit him on the head, then again and again, until he finally fell to the ground, passed out. I was breathing hard, feeling my hands shaking with tension. People ran to the wounded man, trying to stop the bleeding. One of them looked at me and nodded. "Good job," he said. "We managed." But I knew it wasn't the end. The maniac was just one of the many horrors lurking in this forest. But this time, we won. I could feel the tension coming off me, and a sense of relief was slowly coming. We were safe, yet. Local residents took me to their village, where I was able to rest and receive medical care. My shoulder was bandaged and I could feel the pain gradually receding, but anxiety still lingered inside me. I could not forget that night and the horror that haunted me. The people in the village were kind and compassionate. They told me their stories about how the maniac had terrorized them for years. He was like a ghost that appeared and disappeared, leaving behind only death and fear. I listened to their stories and understood that we all became victims of this monster. But now that we stopped it, it felt like we could start living again. I could feel hope slowly returning. I spent a few days in the village helping the locals restore order after the horrors they had endured. We worked together, shared stories, and supported each other. It was a new page in our life. But one day when I woke up early in the morning, I heard something strange. It was a sound I couldn't recognize. When I went outside, I saw people gathering near the forest, their faces filled with fear again. "What happened?" I asked, coming closer. "We found another body," one of the men replied. "It's impossible. We stopped him. How could this happen?" My heart sank. The maniac is back again. And this time, he will not leave us alone. We knew we had to act quickly. People gathered to discuss what to do next. We couldn't just leave it at that. We had to find him and end this once and for all. I joined the search party, armed with a flashlight and a stick. We went into the forest. Every step felt like a test. Darkness enveloped us again, and we knew that the maniac was somewhere nearby. We searched every corner of the forest, listening for any sound. But the maniac was cunning. He knew this forest better than we did, and he played with us like a cat with a mouse. We finally found his hiding place. It was a small cabin hidden among the trees. We crept closer, trying not to give ourselves away. My adrenaline was pumping, my heart was beating like crazy. We surrounded the hut and went inside. He was there, but not alone. In the hut, we found several other people, his victims who were still alive. He held them captive, reveling in their fear. We freed the prisoners, but the maniac disappeared again. He left us feeling powerless and terrified. He was like a ghost that disappears, leaving behind only shadows. We returned to the village with the captives, feeling our strength draining. People were exhausted, but we knew we couldn't give up. We had to find the maniac and end it once and for all. Days passed in searching and trying to find at least some clue. We searched the forest, but each time we returned with nothing. The maniac was like a shadow that cannot be caught. But one day we found something that gave us hope. It was an old forest map with several hiding places marked on it. We realized that the maniac used these places to hide and move. Now we had a chance to find him. We gathered together, armed and ready for the final battle. We knew this was our last chance. The maniac can no longer. We gathered together, armed and ready for the final battle. The maniac could no longer hide from us. We've come a long way, and today was supposed to end his horror once and for all. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was determined. In the evening, we went to the first hideout on the map. The forest was quiet, only our steps disturbed the silence. Everyone was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but each of us knew we had to stay focused. We had no right to make a mistake. As we approached the hideout, we saw a dim light seeping through the trees. It was an old, abandoned house that seemed to blend into the forest. We crept closer, our hearts pounding in our chests, our hands shaking with tension. Suddenly, a scream was heard from the house. It was a trap. A maniac was waiting for us. We rushed forward, realizing that there was almost no time left. The door slammed open and we flew inside, ready for battle. The maniac stood in the middle of the room, his eyes shining with madness. He raised the knife, but we were ready. One of the men rushed at him, and a violent fight began. Screams, blows, everything mixed up in chaos. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me, and I rushed to help. Finally, after a long and exhausting struggle, we were able to knock him to the ground. I stood over him holding the stick and saw his eyes gradually dim. He was no longer a threat. We won. After our victory, it was several days before we returned to normal life. The village slowly recovered, people began to feel safe. We knew the maniac would never come back, but the wounds he left will take a long time to heal. We were all exhausted but relieved. Each of us has faced our fears and experienced horrors that are hard to forget. But we persevered. We won. That was the most important thing. I decided to stay in the village for a while longer, helping to rebuild everything that had been destroyed. The people here became like family to me, and I felt a duty to support them. Together, we could overcome any difficulties. Over time, life in the village began to return to normal. People were smiling, children were playing in the streets, and even the forest didn't seem so scary anymore. We defeated the darkness and found the light. But I knew I would never forget what happened. This experience changed me forever. I learned how important it is to be strong and determined, even when fear is paralyzing. Life can be cruel and unfair, but we must fight to survive. Months passed and I was back to my life, but every time I closed my eyes, those terrible events appeared before me again. The feeling of danger and fear did not leave me. I understood that these scars would remain forever. I started working on myself, visiting a psychologist and sharing my experiences. It was hard, but gradually I began to feel relief. I realized that I will never forget that night, but I can learn to live with it. One day, while walking around the city, I ran into an old friend. He also experienced similar horrors and told his story. We talked a lot, shared our fears and experiences. It was incredibly important to know that you are not alone. We decided to work together to help others who have been through similar situations. Created a support group where people could share their stories and find support. It gave us a sense of purpose and hope. Life went on and we faced new challenges, but now we were stronger and ready for any difficulties. We knew that together we could overcome anything. Every day was a new challenge, but also a new beginning. We continued to fight for our happiness and safety, remembering what we had experienced, and it made us stronger. Over time, I found inner peace. I realized that the most important thing is not to be afraid of your fears, but to be able to fight them. Life can be difficult, but it also gives us incredible opportunities for growth and self-improvement. My life had changed forever, but I knew it had changed for the better. I learned to appreciate every moment and find joy in the simple things. I found new friends and support that helped me through my darkest times. I will always remember those events and those people who helped me survive. They have become a part of my life, and I am grateful for every moment we spent together. These memories will always be with me, reminding me how much stronger we are than we think. Life is an eternal battle, but now I know that I can win. I am not afraid of the dark because I know that I will always find the light, and every day is a new chance to become better, stronger, and happier. Months passed, and life began to improve. But one day when I was walking in the forest near the village, an indescribable fear came over me. The feeling that someone was watching me was disturbing. I looked around but saw no one. A cold sweat covered my back, and I realized that the old fears had returned. Restlessness haunted me for the next few weeks. I felt the shadow of the past creeping up on me again. Every night I had nightmares about a maniac. I saw his face, his crazy eyes. He came again to terrorize me. One morning I found a strange symbol carved into a tree near my house. It was the same symbol that the maniac left at the scene of his crimes. My heart sank with fear. He came back. But how is this possible? We destroyed it. I began to investigate, trying to find at least some answers. He returned to the old records, reviewed the testimony and case materials. But there was no indication that the maniac could survive. Maybe it was someone else, someone who decided to follow his actions. One day, while looking through old photos, I noticed something strange. One of them showed a person standing aside. Her face was partially hidden, but I sensed that this might be an important clue. I decided to find this person. I found him in one of the remote villages. His name was Jackson, and he was one of the maniac's victims who miraculously survived. He told me his story and explained that the symbols on the trees are warnings. The maniac had accomplices who continue his business. Jackson helped me understand that the true maniac was not alone. He had assistants who continued his work even after his death. It was a whole network of criminals who acted on his instructions. We had to stop them. We decided to catch the accomplices of the maniac by setting a trap. They returned to the forest and left traces that should have attracted their attention. There was nothing left but to wait. Time dragged on slowly, but we knew this was our only chance. Late at night, we heard footsteps. My heart was beating wildly in my chest. We hid, waiting for the suspects. Finally, several figures appeared in the clearing. They were the accomplices of the maniac. We came out of our hiding places and surrounded them. A fierce fight began. The accomplices of the maniac were armed and ready for battle. We fought with all our might, trying to stop them. Screams, blows, everything mixed up in chaos. But this time we could not lose. We fought for our lives and the lives of our loved ones. Finally, after a long and tiring struggle, we were able to stop them. The accomplices of the maniac were overthrown, but at the cost of great effort. We knew this was just the beginning. We needed to deal with the entire network and stop this horror forever. We handed the detainees over to the police and began cooperating with law enforcement agencies to find other accomplices. Every day was a new challenge, but we were ready to fight. We knew we had to do everything we could to protect our village and our loved ones. Although we were able to stop a few accomplices, we knew that the threat was not gone. The maniac's network was large and dangerous. We continued to work to find the others and stop them. It was a difficult and exhausting process, but we could not stop. In the process of investigation, we found unexpected allies. Other victims of the maniac and their relatives joined us, providing information and support. Together, we were stronger and could achieve more. It gave us hope and faith that we can win. We continued to look for new clues and traces that could lead us to other accomplices. Each new day brought new challenges, but we did not stop. We knew we had to finish what we started. Each of us was ready to go to the end. During the investigation, we realized that the maniac's network had a new leader. This was someone who continued the work of the maniac with even greater brutality. We had to find him and stop him. This was our main enemy, and we knew that the fight would be difficult. We have assembled a team of experts to assist us in our investigation. They worked together, collected evidence and traces, analyzed every detail. It was a difficult and exhausting process, but we knew we had to do everything we could to find a new leader. Finally, we found the first evidence that pointed to a possible leader. This was a person who remained in the shadows but managed all the actions of the network. We began to follow him, gathering more information and reports. Every day brought new discoveries and new dangers. We were getting closer to our goal. Each new day was a step forward. We knew that we would soon be able to find and stop the leader. But we also understood that the struggle would be difficult and dangerous. We were ready for any challenges. We prepared a plan of action and went to the final stage of our investigation. Each of us knew our role and was ready to act. We gathered all the evidence and were ready for a decisive battle. We had to find and stop the leader once and for all.